Okay, thanks everybody for coming today. This is going to be secure workflow and permissions in large websites, or as I like to call it, Plone workflows for the win. Whatever CMS you're considering, whether it's Plone or something else, think about these features. Workflow can be extremely powerful, and ask yourself, do these features, customizations, are they available for any content management system you might be looking at? My name is Anthony Bosio. I'm a front-end developer and Python developer for 6 Feet Up. My education is in graphic design, so I'm not a computer scientist, so bear with me. I've been developing for and using Plone since 2008, and I joined 6 Feet Up in 2016. 6 Feet Up is a Python and cloud expert consulting company, which is a fancy way of saying that we enjoy helping other teams get their projects unstuck when they have too much work. Oops. We were founded in 1999, so we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We're headquartered in Fishers. We're Women's Business Enterprise Certified and the founders of IndyPy and Indy AWS meetups. Okay, workflows in Plone. What do workflows really let you do? They track and control the state of a piece of Plone content and the permissions associated with each state. Workflows, especially when combined with custom content types, make Plone extremely powerful. The workflow could be used simply for managing the creation and publication of content on your website, but it could also be used for modeling complex business processes that are currently being done perhaps in a less efficient way. When I say less efficient way, I'm talking primarily about long email threads that are unstructured and go to 10 people, 5 of whom don't really need to be on the email, possibly going around for a week before the process completes, and maybe has to be the same thing happens over and over again. That's a great place to look for how a workflow in some sort of online system can make everything run smoother. Just want to tell you a little bit about the way content is structured in Plone in case you're not familiar with it. It's fairly basic idea, kind of just like your desktop computer where you have folders and you can put content types inside of those folders, such as pages or an event, or the custom types that you create that are specific to your needs. This builds the navigation in Plone, unless you decide to do it a different way. It also builds your URL structure, but more relevant to what we're talking about now is it impacts the security, because security cascades through the folders in Plone. So permissions assigned to a folder will affect all of the child objects inside of that folder unless they are under the control of a workflow on their own or local roles, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So for instance, if you add an image or a file inside of a folder and that folder is not visible to the world, say anonymous users, it's in private, a private state, so to speak, and you add, even if you add that image to a page that's published, the image will not be visible because it's inside of a parent, maybe in a different location that parent is not, it's still private. How do we define a workflow? In Plone, a definition of a workflow is basically the states that are in the workflow from start to finish, or it doesn't even necessarily need to have a linear implication. The state security, which is which roles can view or edit, primarily which roles can view or edit the content object while it's in that state. The transitions, which are the connectors between the states. So you have something in one state and it transitions to another state. And then also the transition security, which is which roles can enact those transitions to move something from one state to another. Plone comes with several workflows. pre-installed, pre-set up on your instance when you get it running. But you can customize those or create your own as needed. We're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the simple publication workflow, just to get a little bit more familiar with the terminology of workflows. So here we have the simple publication workflow. We can see that it has 3 states: private, pending review, and published. There are several transitions noted by the arrows connecting them. And the published transition is highlighted. In this case, you can publish directly from private to published or from pending to published, except not the same person or roles do not have permission to do that. So if what we call a contributor created the initial object and it's in the private state, they probably, or they may, in this workflow, they would have only the option to submit it to pending. A reviewer, somebody with a reviewer role, would then need to go to the pending object and publish it. They could also just go to the private object before it's been submitted and say, this looks good. So they can proactively go in and publish that from the private state to the published state. Here's a more detailed look at the states and their transitions and related permissions in the simple publication workflow. These details aren't incredibly important to remember. It's just, you can see in the parentheses, it's who has the ability to see or edit, or who has the ability to do the transition, which are the indented bullet point there. So for the private state, for instance, only the owner can view or edit that. And only they can submit it to pending, but a reviewer can go in and publish that, as we said before. Other contributors would not be able to see that object until it's been published, or I can't remember, it might be in the, let's see, what's it say, pending. Yeah, other contributors can see it once it's in the pending state, in case you want to ask somebody for feedback or something like that. In order to save space, I didn't include it in this list, but you can assume that an administrator can view or edit any content and send it through any transition at any time, as a basic rule. So quickly, we're gonna just take a look at what that looks like in a default Plone installation. Here I'm logged in as an administrator, and we're just on the default homepage. If I go into the submission folder, we're going to pretend we're just starting out building a university website. I have a folder in here that's red that denotes that it's not published, and a page called application process with some text on it that is published. Just as the administrator, to show you how this works, I'm going to add a new page and I'll call this test. And for now, I'm not going to worry about adding any text, but I could just put whatever there. And so the initial state is private, as we saw on the other screen. And as an administrator, I can publish or submit. So this is the workflow and the transitions that you can trigger. No matter what you style your Plone site as, on this part of the screen, this toolbar will always be there with the tools for managing the content. So let's go ahead and publish this. Actually, we'll submit it for publication. And then let's say the reviewer comes along and they can publish it. The owner could also, I believe the owner could retract it from the published state, or a reviewer admin. So we'll send it, retract it. So now it's back to private. It could be worked on again. I'm going to publish it one more time. And then I just want to show you there's this history area where you can see a log of workflow transitions, different states, and when they occurred. And there's actually, you can have versioning where it will keep track of changes, and you can, I believe you can, yeah, you can revert. So if you made some change, you can actually send it back if you don't want that change. Let's go back to the slides. You can add and customize workflows. This is super powerful. Again, like I said, workflows are applied to included and new content types. Each content type can be assigned a workflow or no workflow, in which case, if there's no workflow, it follows the parent's permissions, like I said before. In general, you might want to use one workflow for most of your content, and then you might have some specific workflows for specific applications or things that you need to do within your site. But really, there's no limit as far as I know. You can create what you need to get your work done. Here's an example of a little bit more complicated workflow. This is a workflow for a tech support ticket system, basically. You can see here the issues that get created. They have 8 different states. There's a lot of transitions between them. So, I mean, really, you know, the sky's kind of the limit on the kind of sophisticated workflows you can create. While I was researching for this talk, I actually saw somebody who had created some crazy workflow that had dozens or hundreds of states and many transitions between them. I don't really know how something that complicated could be useful, but they said it was a real workflow. So I was pretty impressed by the ability to actually create that and handle that business process. I will say that there's sort of a rule of thumb that the more states and reviewers that you have in a workflow process, the less content's going to make it to the end of that process, and the longer it's going to take to get there. So normally when you're assigning permissions and roles in Plone, you can do it on a global level for the whole site, but local roles allow us to give those permissions to a group of people within one section of the site. And this is really, really great for large organizations that have different departments, different groups of people that have different responsibilities for maintaining the website and keeping the content current and useful for the people visiting the site. So I'm going to quickly show giving some groups different permissions globally versus locally. In the control panel, site setup, you can see we have a couple users here, Jane editor and John admission. And right now they both are just members, which all initial users are members. That basically means they can log in and have virtually no other permissions. We want to make Jane an editor and a reviewer so she can tweak content, fix grammar, that sort of thing throughout the whole site, and then publish pages as needed. So we would do that here, and now she has that ability throughout the site. I'm logged in as Jane in this tab, and before she was not able to see anything in the admission folder. Now she can see even this unpublished folder here. And if I go to tests, she can edit. Whereas John admission, who still doesn't have any permissions, if I reload and I go to this publish page, he does not have edit. He can't change. He can't trigger a transition to another state. So now, if we want John admission to be able to do things in the admission folder, I'm going to go back to the, we don't want him to work in student life. He's from the admission team. So we're going to give him the ability to add content just in this folder here. So we can do that through this area where once we go to the folder that we want to work on, we can search for, and actually, I forgot to show the groups. Let me go back real quick. Normally, you don't want to assign roles directly to users. And I actually did that wrong here, but through groups, it makes it a little more manageable. Users come and go. You can take them and remove them from the groups instead of having to do it on a per user basis. So what I'm actually going to do is take the editor and reviewer away from Jane, and I'm going to put her in the reviewers group. And then I'm going to go to John and put him in the, did I not create him? Oh, in the admission. Oh, he's already in the admission group. Good. And so when I go to the sharing, I'm going to say that he can, admission group can add in this folder. And now if I go to John's tab and I reload, oh, that's interesting. Okay, the demo gods are after me. He should have the add permit, ability to add. Admission. John's in admission. Okay, well, let's try it globally just so we can. All right, well, I'm not sure why that's working, but we'll go ahead and move on. Content rules. Content rules are a feature in Plone. They're not directly related to workflows, but they have a lot of benefits and they're able to be tied into workflow things. So for instance, we can, I'm gonna do this as an admin. We go to, just show you the, we'll go back to the main site setup. Go here to content rules. I have one set up here already that says email for new admission content. If I go into it, we can say, basically this was set up, says anytime there's a new content in the folder, we can have it send an email. So there's a condition, there's a trigger, a condition, and an action. So when it's triggered and the condition is met, then the action will be send an email to admission under vp@ploneuniversity.edu. We could apply this to the whole site, but that wouldn't make sense. So once the rule is set up here, then you can go to admission and say, go to this rules area that appears and say, all the rules that you create that could be assigned will appear there. So you just add And now anytime a new content object, see object added to this container, would be added to the admission folder, then that person would get a notification. I mean, that might not be the best example, but you can set up content rules to handle all sorts of things. We're going to go and set up a new one. You see we have an events folder here, but a person might add an event inside this folder. But we don't really, once the events are live to the world, we'd like them all to be in the same place so that they can be in one listing, for instance, and that way anybody who needs to work on an event can go find it in one place. So we'll go back to our content rules. And we'll add a new one. And say move events to event folder. And the triggering event is object added to this container, except we're not going to set it to a specific place. We're going to tell it in a minute. We're going to tell it apply this rule on the whole site. So no matter where the event item is added, this content rule will get triggered. We don't need to, well, what we could do is we could say workflow state is published. So when it gets published, we will move to folder. Events. Select that. And now we have a content rule that when an event is published somewhere else in the site, it will get moved to the event folder here. These are some of the triggers, conditions, and actions that are available for content rules that are sort of related directly or indirectly to workflow, such as the one we looked at, which is an object added to a folder. It could be the workflow status changed. Conditions will let you say only do it on a certain workflow state or only act on an item when it's going through a certain workflow transition. You can do things like notify the user with a message within the system, copy, move, or delete something, or send an email. So there are a lot of benefits to workflows. These are just some of the ones I could think of, and actually this training was based on a link that I'm going to provide, so a lot of it came from there. Reducing email inbox overflow is a big one. I know a lot of things are managed through email, but it's not always the most efficient way. Having them in a system like this lets you search for them. You can build reporting based on the different states of things. Your clients who are submitting things can go check the status on something. The benefits are really very numerous. There are some helpful tools. The first two of these are add-ons for Plone. One is called Iterate. Iterate lets you make a copy of a content object. You can have that copy go through a workflow, and then it can be checked back in, replacing the original. We use this at the university that I was working at before, where we didn't want, once something was published, it had gone through our approval workflow. We didn't really want anybody to just go edit the live version, but we wanted subject matter experts throughout the campus to be able to help us keep things, again, current, accurate, and useful for our users, so they could go to a page that they had the role to have access to. They could create a working copy, which would start out in our initial state, which was more or less a private state, like the simple publication workflow we looked at. They could make changes to it, submit that for publication. And then when the reviewer looked at it and said, yes, this is still good, they would check it in and it would replace the live copy for the public anonymous viewers on the website to see. Another thing about doing that is you can, excuse me, it allows you to, for that editor or that person editing the content, to save it while it's still a working copy, come back to it a few times if they need to as they work on it and improve it, and then submit that through the workflow before it gets checked back in. If you just edit a live object and save it, if it's already published, it's still going to be published. So you don't have that ability to work on it incrementally before you're ready to replace the wholesale. So that's a really great feature of Iterate. It can be used in other ways, I'm sure, that I haven't even thought of. There's an add-on for Plone called Workflow Manager. It lets you visualize the workflows that and even create and modify workflows in your site. I can show that real quick. Have it installed here. It's really pretty cool. You can also create workflows programmatically in file system code and through the content, through the management interface that's even lower level than this one we're looking at. But this one is a little more visual. So if we look at that simple publication workflow, you can see it just creates it here. If I do, where am I looking? Design mode. And you can drag these around. You can then click on different transitions to see what they are. So you can actually create states. Say, for instance, I can add a state. I can make it a copy of one of the existing ones, or I can just say, so now I've got the state in here. I can say transitions a state can use. I can say maybe the state is somebody can publish it. A member can retract it from that state. So it's a pretty neat tool for building out your workflow. I haven't actually used it a whole lot myself, but it can be very useful for doing through the web stuff. At 6 Feet Up, we typically do all our workflow stuff in file system code. And lastly, dexterity content types. All content types in the most recent versions of Plone use a framework called dexterity. The most important thing about that is that it lets you manipulate your content types through the web, through this control panel. So here are the basic content types that come with Plone. You can see an event, for instance, has, as most objects have, a title and description, but it also has, event data fields relevant to an event, such as start and end, date and time, etc. Location, all the things you would expect to find for an event. But if you wanted to add something, like something I might typically add is GPS. We have a location field, but that's really more, I believe it's more for, like, you could put some string in, like the name of the place or something like that. With this, you could then, with a template customization, actually I should. With the template customization, you could then take these coordinates and automatically embed a Google map. So, you know, so now that is here. I could move it somewhere else by grabbing the handle, change where it appears in the, why is that not working? Maybe because it's new. Wow, demo gods are really after me today. Okay. Anyway, you can see how easy it is to customize your content types through here. Combining a custom content type that maybe mimics a business process or form that you have in your organization, and then combining that with a workflow that has all the approvals or different people that need to either review something or add information to a content type before it gets to its final sort of state. Super, super powerful. And being able to do more of it through the web now is also very useful. If you need more information, of course, about Plone, you can get it at plone.org. These two links are workflow related training